The soup arrived cold, and the Duke of Ashbourne said nothing at all. Miss Cordelia Fenwick set down her spoon with the careful precision of a woman raised to notice everything and comment on nothing that mattered. "You are quiet tonight, Your Grace." Her father, Lord Fenwick, sat at his right hand, already 3 glasses into the claret, and pleased with himself for it. He lifted his glass toward the candlelight. "You'll have less to think of once the announcement is made. A wife takes on such burdens gladly." Cordelia's smile did not change. It had not changed all evening. She was handsome in the accepted way, fair-haired, correctly dressed, and a stranger to Julian Harcourt, Duke of Ashbourne. He had met her 3 times in as many years, always with her mother present. He had accepted the match because it was useful to both families, and because his parents had shown him an orderly marriage survived where an intimate one might not. The soup had been cold, and no one at the table but Julian seemed to notice. He set down his spoon. "Excuse me a moment." He found the kitchen by following the sound of it. Pans, low voices, the chaos of a household, short-staffed and pretending otherwise. He had not set foot below stairs since he was a boy, trailing his old housekeeper, Mrs. Hale, dead since March. A woman stood at the long table, sleeves pushed back, hands buried in dough she was working with more force than the recipe likely required. She looked up when the door opened and did not curtsy fast enough to hide that she'd been irritated before he arrived. She wiped flour from her wrist. "Your Grace, is something wrong with the soup?" Julian stayed near the door. It was cold. She lifted the ladle from its pot and set it down again, precise. "It was hot when it left this kitchen 12 minutes ago. There's 1 footman carrying for 6 covers tonight. Mrs. Hale had 4. I've asked Mr. Greaves for more hands twice this month." He studied her a moment. "You're the new cook." She folded a cloth over the rising dough. "Elizabeth Marsh, since February." He tilted his head slightly, as if the arithmetic displeased him. 3 months, and I've not met you." She turned back to her work as she answered. "You've been in London 3 months, Your Grace." He watched her a moment longer than the errand required. "See that the next course is warm." She had already returned to the dough. "It will be." He went back to the dining room. Cordelia asked if all was in order. He said it was. Lord Fenwick raised his glass to futures well arranged, and Julian drank to it, and did not think of the kitchen again until the fish arrived, hot, dressed with more care than the occasion required of a household this depleted. He noticed. No one else did. He worked late the following night, papers from the estate office spread across his desk. When the tray came at 9:30, it was hot. When it came again at 11, forgotten and reheated, it was hot again, and no note of complaint came with it. The footman shifted his weight when Julian asked who had sent it up twice. "Mrs. Marsh insisted, Your Grace, said a man can't do accounts on an empty stomach." Mrs. Hale would have let the tray go cold and called it his own fault. He found the household books 3 days later, left open on his steward's desk, and noticed a column of corrections in a hand that was not Greaves's. Candles, 6 unused from last quarter, found in still room. Butcher's account queried, overcharged 11 shillings. Resolved. Greaves cleared his throat when asked whose hand it was. "Mrs. Marsh's, Your Grace. She's saved the estate near £40 this quarter, though it hasn't been my place to say so." Julian found her in the kitchen that evening, the account books tucked under his arm as excuse. He set the ledger on the table. "You corrected the butcher's account yourself." She did not look up from the pot. "He was cheating you. 11 shillings isn't a fortune, but it becomes a habit if no one stops it early. He conceded the point with a small nod. It isn't. She set the spoon down against the pot's edge. Then we're agreed. He should have left. Instead, he pulled the stool the kitchen maids used for shelling peas and sat without quite deciding to. He watched her stir before asking why the widow at the Eastern cottage received a basket every Thursday. Her hand stilled on the spoon. How did you know that? He watched her recover herself before answering. Greaves mentioned it. He seemed to think you'd be embarrassed by the question. She added salt, set the spoon down. I'm not embarrassed. I don't see what use it is to you, knowing it. Mrs. Coombe lost her husband in the autumn, 3 children too young to earn. There's food enough in this kitchen that a basket costs the estate nothing it would miss. He considered this. That isn't your decision to make with my stores. She met his eyes without apology. No, it's yours. I hoped you wouldn't mind, given you hadn't noticed. He stood before she could see what his face was doing. Continue it. He began taking dinner in the small family room after that, closer to the kitchen stair. He told himself it was practical and did not examine the excuse further. One evening, he found her not cooking, but writing. A battered leather notebook open beside a half-finished loaf, her pen stopping the moment she heard the door. He gestured toward it. What is that? She closed it, then, after a moment, opened it again, reluctant. My father was schoolmaster in a village outside Bath. He taught me my letters and my figures before his illness took him. My aunt kept a working kitchen in Somerset after that, and I went to her. She turned a page without looking at him. I've kept this since I was a girl. Recipes, remedies, notes on keeping food through a hard winter. I mean to have it printed one day. A practical book, written by someone who's actually done the work. He leaned forward slightly. Under your own name? She said this without bitterness, a fact long since settled. Under some name. A cook's name wouldn't sell it, but I'd know it was mine. He found he wanted very much to see it published under her own name and did not know what to do with wanting that. He found he wanted very much to see it published under her own name and did not know what to do with wanting that. The following week, restless and unwilling to name why, he attempted to help her portion dough for the ovens. He made such a poor showing that she laughed outright before pressing a floured hand to her mouth. Forgive me, Your Grace. He looked at the misshapen lump in his hands. You needn't apologize for accuracy. Is it meant to look like this? She took it from him, reshaping it in 4 quick motions, unbothered by touching his hands to do it. It's meant to look like bread. You've clearly never wanted for anything you couldn't ring a bell for. He watched her fix what he had ruined. I've wanted for a great many things. None of them required kneading. She studied him a moment too long before catching herself and returning to the ovens. No, I don't suppose they did. Rain began against the window while they worked, sudden and hard, and neither moved to remark on it. It was the first evening either of them left that kitchen smiling. He kept her a second time not long after, the excuse thinner. Dinner in the small dining room had ended when he asked whether the evening's tart had come from her aunt's book, already knowing the answer, wanting only that she stay long enough to say it herself. She set her notebook on the table rather than tucking it away. You remembered I mentioned my aunt. He did not know why he offered the next detail, only that she should understand he had kept it. You mentioned her once, a fortnight ago. She studied him with open curiosity, as though reconsidering something. Most men forget what a cook says the moment she's left the room. He attempted to pour the tea himself. I'm told I'm not very good company for most men either. He managed the pot badly enough that she reached over without asking and steadied his hand on it. You'll scald yourself before you scald anyone else. She took the pot from him entirely. Sit still and let me do it properly. He sat. It was, he considered, not an unpleasant instruction to receive. He asked what she would write if she weren't bound to household economy alone. She turned her cup once on its saucer before answering. The stories behind the recipes, I think. Who taught them? What families survived on when there was little else? What a kitchen says about the house it feeds, if anyone troubled to ask it. She glanced at him, wary of having said too much. No one's ever asked me that before. He meant it more plainly than he'd meant to say anything in some time. I find I'd like to know the answer. She gathered her notebook at last, later than either of them had noticed, the hour growing. At the door, she paused. Will you want the tart again tomorrow, Your Grace, or only my company to go with it? He had no honest answer ready, and she did not wait for one. The room felt smaller once she'd gone, though nothing in it had changed. Word of the moved wedding date reached him before it reached her. Lord Fenwick's letter, eager to have things settled, October instead of Christmas. Julian told Elizabeth plainly, standing in the doorway rather than sitting. The wedding's been moved forward. She did not stop working, though her hands slowed over the bread. That's good news, surely. He watched her hands. Is it? She set down her knife and turned to face him fully, and something in her control slipped. You are marrying Miss Fenwick in October. I am the cook in your kitchen. I have let myself hope in ways I've no business hoping, and I would ask you to stop giving me reason to before one of us is ruined for it. I promise you it will not be you. He had no answer ready. He left, and did not return for 11 days. The small dining room went dark and unused. His tray arrived once instead of twice, and when it went cold, he let it, unwilling to ring for a second and unable to say why. Greaves noticed his master eating alone at the head of a table built for 20, one candle burning at the far end, and said nothing. The pea-shelling stool sat empty by the hearth. When Julian's path crossed Elizabeth's on the stairs, she curtsied and called him Your Grace, in a voice gone perfectly, unbearably correct. On the 9th day, he reached the kitchen door and did not open it. On the 11th, he did. She was at the account book and did not look up until he had stood in the doorway long enough that not looking up became its own answer. She closed the book gently, without anger. You've been from the kitchen 11 days, Your Grace, he answered simply. I know. She folded her hands over the closed book. The widow's basket still went out. He came no closer. I never doubted it would. I found I could not eat in my own dining room. She set the book aside before she spoke again. Then perhaps you ought to see to that. I've nothing further to say on the matter that I haven't already said. He left again that night, but not for 11 days. Lady Fenwick arrived with her husband and daughter to finalize the wedding arrangements. Over tea, she remarked to her own maid, within easy hearing, that the cook had grown rather familiar, and that a woman closer to the future Duchess's expectations might suit the transition better. The maid carried the word below stairs. Greaves, fearing scandal and assuming the Countess spoke for the coming mistress of the house, began drafting a release before Julian had been told anything of it at all. Julian found the paper half-finished on the steward's desk and took it from beneath his hand. This wasn't your decision to make, Greaves. Greaves went pale. Your Grace, Lady Fenwick gave me to understand. Julian folded the paper once and set it aside. Lady Fenwick has no authority in this house. None. He went to the kitchen himself. Before the staff gathered for the evening, he tore the release the rest of the way through before he spoke. Mrs. Marsh is not dismissed. She has kept this household functioning since March, with more honesty than I've shown it myself in 3 years of leaving it to strangers. No guest under this roof has authority over her position. Anyone told otherwise may bring the matter to me directly. It cost him what he expected. Lord Fenwick's face went stiff with the offence of a man watching a comfortable arrangement wobble. Lady Fenwick did not speak to him again that evening. Elizabeth found him outside the kitchen once the staff had dispersed, her expression steadier than his own. "That was right of you. I'll not pretend otherwise." He waited for more, sensing it was coming. She held his gaze without flinching. "But you cannot say those words before the whole household, and then climb back upstairs to a woman you mean to marry as though nothing has shifted. Whatever happens next has to be yours to decide, not mine to wait on." He understood then that there was only one honest direction left to walk. That night he asked Cordelia to walk with him in the garden, away from both families. He waited until they were well clear of the terrace before he spoke. "I think you know why I've asked to speak with you." She drew her shawl closer, unhurried. "I think I've known for some weeks, Your Grace. We hardly know one another. I've spent our whole acquaintance saying what my mother believed I ought to say." He kept his eyes on the dark hedge ahead of them. "I should have ended this sooner. You deserved better than a dinner table and correspondence." She considered him a moment more honestly than 3 years of correct dinners had required of her. "I'll not pretend my heart is broken over it. I wanted the settlement and my mother's satisfaction, and I am not certain I wanted you especially, if I'm honest." He inclined his head, accepting it. "You'll have whatever protection this requires, the settlement, your standing, my full account to your father that the fault is mine." She adjusted her glove before answering and looked at him directly. "That's generous, and I'll accept it. I hope you've learned to ask a woman what she wants before arranging the rest of her life around her." He found Elizabeth in the empty kitchen, the fire low, her notebook closed on the table before her, as though she had been waiting without permitting herself to call it that. "The engagement is ended." She did not rise. "I'd heard something of it. The whole house has heard, I should think." He crossed the room, closing the distance he'd kept for months. "I'm not here because it's ended. I'm here because I sent your dinner tray up once instead of twice for 11 days and could not sit in my own dining room for the quiet of it. Because you correct my accounts and feed a widow's children who are no business of yours, and keep a book you mean to publish under a name that isn't your own, and I find I would like to know all of it, not as your employer, but as a man asking whether you might choose him freely." She folded her hands over the notebook before she spoke. "You needn't marry me to keep me employed, Julian. My place here was never in question, whatever Lady Fenwick believes." It was the first time she had used his given name. He heard it land before he had gathered any answer to give it. He took her hand, flower and ink and all, and did not let go. "I know it wasn't. That isn't what I'm asking. Your book will be printed under your own name, married or not. I can put you in front of a reputable publisher and pay for it to be judged fairly. No further than that. The work stays yours. Your place in this house stays yours, whether you refuse me tonight or not." She held his gaze steadily. "I'll not become a curiosity in a drawing room or a servant dressed in silk and called a duchess for the amusement of it. He answered without hesitation. "You'll run this house still, if you wish it. I've no talent for it myself, as you've had occasion to observe." A ghost of her earlier laugh returned, then faded into something more careful. "And if what you feel is only gratitude, once the surprise of it wears off." He held her gaze. "Then you'll have your own income, your own name on your own book, and the right to leave a man who disappointed you. I'm not offering rescue, Elizabeth. I'm asking what you want your life to hold, and whether I might have some place in it." She looked at him a long moment, weighing it the way she weighed every decision at that table, carefully, without flinching from the cost either way. Then she rose, closed the distance he had not quite managed to close himself, and kissed him once, briefly, of her own will and no one else's asking. She drew back only far enough to see his face. "Yes, I believe I already have." The wedding was smaller than the county expected. Some families sent regrets that were not truly regrets, and Elizabeth knew it, and did not pretend otherwise. Mrs. Coombs' children stood near the front in clothes bought, not given as charity, from a friendship 3 years deep by then. The kitchen staff attended as guests at the bride's insistence, and Greaves wept without shame at the register, blaming it afterward on the church being cold. At her first formal dinner as Duchess, an elderly guest addressed a question about the household's winter stores directly to Julian, as though the woman beside him could not be expected to know her own kitchen. Julian did not answer for her. He looked toward Elizabeth and waited. She answered plainly, naming the stores laid in and the reasoning behind them, until the guest's expression shifted from doubt to something closer to respect. The subject moved on. No one raised it again. Elizabeth trained her own replacements slowly, on her own terms, and kept oversight of the kitchen by choice rather than necessity. She wrote mornings now, when the house was quiet, and her book was published the following spring under her full name, a practical volume on household economy that sold respectably through 3 counties. The small dining room stayed in daily use. The household books carried 2 hands still, hers correcting his margins as often as ever. On an ordinary evening the following winter, Elizabeth sat at the kitchen table with a fresh page open before her, a second manuscript taking shape in her careful hand. Julian came down before the meal had time to cool, as he had learned to, and pulled the old stool toward the table without being asked. She pushed a portion of dough across to him without looking up from her page. He shaped it badly, the same as always. She glanced over once, corrected the angle of his hands with 2 fingers, and returned to her writing. He followed it, and the bread came out crooked, and the kitchen stayed warm.